Welcome to Cybersecurity Under Pressure. Real attacks, real lessons. Every breach starts with something small. A trusted login, a missed alert, a system no one thought could matter. Here, we follow the incident. How it began, how it moved, what broke under pressure, and what security engineering and business teams should learn before the next one. Because the next attack will not wait for a perfect plan. Now, let's follow the evidence.
You know what a Swiss bank and a Nairobi fintech have in common? Today we find out.
Oh, this is going to be good.
Because the reality is, they both completely rely on this highly complex, deeply interconnected web of secure APIs just to move assets, and verify identities without the whole system just collapsing into total chaos.
Right.
And the darkly hilarious, or maybe just totally terrifying part, that is exactly the same technology protecting the multi-ton kinetic missile currently sitting in your driveway, your car.
Yeah, it forces a completely different perspective, doesn't it? When you realize that pressing the start button on your dashboard is, it's functionally identical to executing a high-frequency financial trade. It's all just data packets and authentication tokens now.
Good morning. Welcome, Cybersecurity Under Pressure, real attacks, real lessons. We are diving deep into automotive cybersecurity today. And I have to tell you, parsing through this stack of sources, the NIS risk assessments, the upstream reports, the academic teardowns of the anonymous cup, it feels less like reading about cars and more like, reading a postmortem on a compromised intelligence agency.
The parallel is incredibly apt, honestly, especially because the automotive industry is currently experiencing this massive identity crisis. For the last century, a car was a mechanical island.
A heavy metal box.
Exactly. You engineer it, you bolt it together, you run it through safety crash tests, and once it clears the factory floor, the security posture is effectively frozen in amber.
Yeah.
That was the era of what we call factory gate security.
Right, which made perfect sense when the primary threat model was like a guy with a Slim Jim trying to pop the door lock in a grocery store parking lot. The physical metal of the car was the security perimeter.
Yeah, you didn't have to worry about someone hacking your carburetor from Russia.
Exactly. And looking at the history of the UNES WP.29 regulations, specifically standards like R155 and R156, you can see that legacy mindset codified into law. They were designed to ensure that a vehicle was completely secure at the exact moment of type approval. And then, ship and forget it.
And they served their purpose, right, for a closed ecosystem. But the entire premise of our discussion today, and really the blaring siren at the center of the EU's NIS Cooperation Group's 2026 Security Risk Assessment of Connected and Automated Vehicles, is that this closed ecosystem just no longer exists.
It's totally gone.
The NIS report is explicit about this. Relying on factory gate validation is dangerously inadequate now because the threat landscape has evolved from localized physical tampering to remote, scalable, and highly sophisticated digital warfare. We are talking about nation-state actors actively targeting the kinetic infrastructure of civilian populations.
Nation-state actors.
Yeah.
That is wild. And that involves malicious over-the-air updates, right? Which fundamentally breaks the old model because the code running the car today might not be the code running the car tomorrow. So when I buy a brand new top-of-the-line car, is its security architecture already obsolete the moment I drive it off the lot?
If the manufacturer relies solely on that initial factory gate perimeter, yes, absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Because a static defense cannot protect a dynamic node, and that's the exact term the upstream security report uses to describe the modern vehicle. A dynamic digital node. Upstream argues that the very concept of a digital perimeter around a single vehicle has completely vanished. It's gone.
Because the vehicle is practically inside out at this point, right?
Right.
It's an intelligent connected vehicle, an ICV, which means its operations are inextricably linked to external networks. I was mapping out the architecture based on the upstream gate for you guys listening, and the sheer volume of telemetry is staggering.
Walk us through the map you built. Where are the connections?
Well, okay, first you have the mobile app on your phone, which is sending biometric or tokenized authentication up to a cloud platform.
Right.
That cloud platform is managing not just your car, but millions of vehicles, and it's routing commands back down to the vehicle's T-box or telematics box. Then inside the cabin, you have the in-vehicle infotainment system. the IVI, which is essentially just a giant Android tablet hardwired into the dashboard, and it's constantly pulling data via 5G or Wi-Fi.
And beneath all of that, beneath the screens and the flashy apps, is the real central nervous system, the CAN bus, which connects dozens of electronic control units, or ECUs.
Exactly. And on top of all of that, if you drive an EV, you have the charging pile infrastructure to worry about. Every single time you plug in, your car's negotiating this incredibly complex digital handshake with the grid to manage voltage, billing, authentication. I mean, it's honestly a running joke in my house that my car has a better cell data plan than my actual phone.
Oh, I believe it.
It's always online, always downloading a map patch or an infotainment update, or just silently sending telemetry back to the manufacturer while it sits in the garage.
It's a great joke, but it highlights the core structural vulnerability of the software-defined vehicle. By extending the car's functionality into the cloud to support all those cool features, engineers inadvertently extended the attack surface outward. The steering column is no longer the most scalable risk.
Right.
The scalable risk sits in the back-end APIs. Because if an attacker compromises the API gateway in the cloud, they don't just get one car, they get the keys to the entire fleet.
Okay, let's pull the thread on APIs then, because the Cisco blog data we analyzed provides this brutal reality check on why automotive APIs are so uniquely vulnerable compared to, say, enterprise IT APIs. When we talk about APIs, application programming interfaces, we're talking about the digital messengers that take a request from your mobile app, validate it, and tell the car's internal computers to, unlock the doors.
Yeah, they're the waiters taking the order to the kitchen.
Exactly. But the problem isn't necessarily the API itself. It's what the API is talking to on the vehicle side, the ECUs.
That's the critical bottleneck. In a traditional enterprise environment, if you want to secure an API endpoint, you just throw massive computational power at it. You use AES 256 encryption, complex mutual TLS handshakes, continuous token rotation. It's heavy cryptography. But an electronic control unit in a car is not a server blade in an AWS data center.
Right, an ECU is a highly specialized, deeply constrained microcomputer. It controls the engine timing, the anti-lock brakes, the airbag deployment. It's not running a full desktop OS.
And because it controls kinetic, literally life or death functions, it operates on a real-time operating system. The constraints on these things are severe. They have microscopic amounts of memory, strict power limitations, and zero tolerance for latency.
Because of the physics of driving.
Exactly. If the radar detects an obstacle and tells the braking ECU to engage, that ECU cannot pause for 50 milliseconds to unpack a complex cryptographic certificate. It has to act instantaneously or you crash.
So the engineers are forced into this brutal compromise. They can't run heavy security on the internal nodes.
They physically can't. The Cisco data outlines this perfectly. The standard architectural workaround they use is to designate one high-complexity ECU, usually the telematics unit, to act as the primary gateway to the internet.
So that's the bouncer at the club.
Right. This gateway handles the heavy lifting. The TLS encryption, the API communication with the cloud, it acts as the shield. But here is the massive flaw. Once a signal is verified by that gateway and passed into the internal vehicle network, like the CAN bus, the communication between the internal ECUs often occurs in completely plain text.
Wow.
Completely lacking authentication, privacy, or integrity checks.
It's like a medieval castle with this massive iron front gate and low archers on the walls. But once you get past that gate and you're inside the courtyard, there are literally no locks on the bedroom doors. You can just walk into the king's chambers. Or actually, it's like an old school party line telephone system.
Oh, I like that one.
Right. On a party line, every house on the street shares the exact same physical phone wire. If you pick up the receiver, you can just sit there and hear your neighbor's conversation. And if someone on the line shouts, "Hey, the house is on fire, turn on the sprinklers," everyone just assumes the person shouting is telling the truth because they are already on this trusted line. There's no caller ID, there's no voice verification. The internal ECUs operate on absolute implicit trust.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The CAN bus is exactly that. It's a broadcast network. Every ECU hears every single message on the bus. If an attacker can find a way to spoof a message on that party line, the receiving ECU, say, the steering control module, has absolutely no mechanism to verify if the command actually came from the advanced driver assistance system or if it came from a hacker who compromised the infotainment screen and pivoted inward.
Which brings us to the open season of fall 2022. Because this isn't just theoretical modeling anymore, right?
Yeah.
Security researchers essentially proved that the party line was completely exposed.
The 2022 open season was a massive watershed moment for the industry. Independent researchers targeted the back-end APIs of several major global automakers and found that those high-complexity gateways, the bouncers at the club, weren't nearly as secure as the industry believed.
They bypassed the cloud-level authorization entirely. And because the internal network lacked those authentication checks, the researchers could send remote commands directly to the vehicles. They were locking and unlocking doors, starting engines, honking horns, flashing headlights, all from a laptop thousands of miles away.
And the truly terrifying part was the reconnaissance aspect. They could globally geolocate these vehicles using nothing but a vehicle identification number, a VIN, or in some cases, just the owner's email address associated with the companion app.
They demonstrated complete administrative takeover. They accessed internal dealer applications, executed arbitrary code on back-end servers, and exfiltrated highly sensitive, personally identifiable information, or PII, of millions of customers. The APIs were fundamentally broken.
And just when you think the industry would have learned its lesson and locked down those cloud endpoints, we get hit with the September 2024 vulnerability.
Oh man, a Kia hack.
Yes, discovered by Sam Curry, Ian Carroll, Nico Rivera, and their team. This one is it is an absolute masterclass in broken object level authorization, or BO leeway.
I want to break down exactly how this worked, because it literally sounds like a script from a bad cyber thriller. They didn't need the owner's email. They didn't even need the VIN, which is at least stamped on the dashboard and you have to walk up to the car to see it. They could take control of a vehicle using only the license plate number. I literally drive around with a giant piece of metal bolted to the outside of my car that functioned as a remote control password for hackers. I'm going to have to start covering my license plate in the trash bag every time I park just to keep my steering wheel safe.
The absurdity of it is matched only by the simplicity of the exploit. Here's how the researchers mapped the attack path, and it is chilling. The Kia dealer portal had an API endpoint designed to look up vehicle information. If you passed a license plate number to this endpoint, the back-end system would query a database and return the associated VIN.
Okay, so step 1. Look at the license plate in traffic, type it in, get the VIN. But a VIN is an inherently secret key, right? Anyone can walk up to my windshield and read it. How does knowing the VIN actually give them control?
That leads to step 2, which is where the fatal API flaw existed. Kia's mobile app backend allowed users to register as the secondary owner of a vehicle. So a spouse can also use the app to start the car.
Makes sense.
To do this, the app sent an HTTP request to an API endpoint containing the VIN and the new user's email address. The flaw was that the backend system completely failed to validate the session token of the user making the request against the primary owner's permissions.
Oh, wait, what? So the API just assumed that if you asked to be a secondary owner, you just automatically had the right to be one. It didn't send a push notification to my phone asking, hey, someone is trying to register as a driver of your car, do you approve?
Exactly. It completely lacked object-level authorization. The researchers could simply generate a valid session token for their own fake burner account, send a request containing your VIN, and the API would quietly bind their account to your vehicle in the back-end database. No alerts, no checks.
And once their account is bound to my car,
they inherit the full permissions of the mobile app. They can generate the commands to unlock the doors, start the engine, and track the GPS coordinates in real time. From the car's perspective, the command was coming from a legitimate, authenticated source.
the party line trusted the caller.
Exactly.
That is a chilling breakdown of how physical security is entirely dependent on cloud software architecture. Your physical locks are useless if the cloud just tells them to open. And the data proves this isn't an isolated coding error. We have to look at the massive academic study analyzing the anonymous cup, because this study fundamentally rewrites what we know about automotive vulnerability distribution.
The anonymous cup data is arguably the most valuable empirical data set the industry has seen in years. We are looking at a deep, rigorous analysis of 649 real-world, highly exploitable vulnerabilities discovered during a series of 8 vulnerability discovery competitions held between January 2023 and April 2024.
And they didn't just test a handful of cars in the lab. They tested 48 different vehicle models spanning 19 different manufacturers. The methodology is what makes this so incredibly robust to me. This wasn't a theoretical whiteboard exercise. They used strict black box testing.
Yes, and black box testing in this context means the researchers were placed in the exact same position as the real-world adversary. They were given no source code, no internal network diagrams, and no engineering documentation whatsoever. They were provided legitimate access to a test vehicle and its companion app, and from there, they had to completely reverse engineer the attack surface.
They even utilized social engineering, right? They were scraping publicly available information from obscure forums, GitHub repositories, and WeChat mini programs just to piece together the back-end infrastructure of the OEMs. And the ultimate test of their exploits was brutal. They had to prove their attack on a different vehicle of the same make and model of vehicle they had zero legitimate access to.
A true blind validation. It wasn't enough to just hack their own test car. And the findings exposed massive, glaring blind spots in the existing cybersecurity taxonomies used by regulators and engineers. The standard literature, which relies heavily on historical data and theoretical threat models, simply did not account for the sheer creativity of the attackers. The researchers identified 13 entirely new vulnerability types that had never been officially categorized.
Let's talk about some of those new types because they really show how sophisticated the attacks have become. They found vulnerabilities involving cross-domain lateral movement, where an attacker compromises a low-security zone like, say, the infotainment browser you're using to look at the weather, and pivots through the gateway directly into the high-security CAN bus. They found over-the-air payload manipulation, where attackers could literally intercept an update package mid-air and downgrade the firmware to a vulnerable legacy version.
They also identified severe misconfigurations in MQTT brokers. That's the telemetry transport protocol used by many vehicles to send diagnostic data to the cloud. Attackers were subscribing to wildcard topics and intercepting plaintext diagnostic data from thousands of vehicles simultaneously.
Just vacuuming up data. And the study also identified a brand new primary attack location that previous models had vastly underestimated: the T-box.
The telematics box. If the API is the gatekeeper in the cloud, the T-box is the gatekeeper inside the vehicle. It manages the cellular modem, the 4G or 5G connection. It runs a complex operating system, often a hardened version of Linux, and it acts as the vital bridge routing data between the external cloud and the internal CAN bus.
So if you compromise the T-box, you bypass the cloud entirely and get direct access to the internal party line. But here's the statistical twist that blew my mind when I was reading the paper. The T-box is the critical bridge, but it actually wasn't where the vast majority of vulnerabilities were found. When you look at the distribution of the 649 vulnerabilities, a staggering 37.8% hit the cloud platform, and another 32% hit the in-vehicle infotainment system. That is nearly 70% of all vulnerabilities concentrated in just two areas. Why is the infotainment screen such a massive target?
It really comes down to architectural complexity and the surface area of exposed interfaces. Let's look at the IVIS. The modern infotainment system is not just a radio anymore. It is essentially an open computing environment running Android Automotive or QNX. It has a massive attack surface because it is fundamentally designed for maximum connectivity and interactivity.
It has a web browser, connects to third-party app stores, it interfaces with your phone via Bluetooth, it has physical USB ports, and it connects to public Wi-Fi networks at coffee shops.
Exactly. Every single one of those connections is a potential ingress point. And because consumers demand rich graphics and complex applications, the IVI contains millions of lines of code. The more code you have, especially third-party code for streaming apps or navigation, the higher the statistical probability of a memory corruption bug, a buffer overflow, or a simple misconfiguration.
So you hack the Spotify app on the dashboard, escalate privileges to the underlying Android operating system, and certainly you are positioned to send lateral commands to the vehicle's internal network. And okay, there was one specific detail in the Anonymous Cup study regarding this that I found darkly hilarious. They broke down the vulnerabilities by vehicle type: sedans, MPVs, and SUVs.
Yes, the anomaly in the data distribution.
The SUVs had a significantly higher number of vulnerabilities compared to sedans and MPVs, which means if you're a safety-conscious parent and you go out and spend $80,000 on a premium, top-of-the-line family SUV because you want the safest, heaviest thing on the road for your kids, you are actually purchasing a massive rolling attack surface for hackers.
It is a very dark irony, yes. But from an automotive engineering perspective, the causality is very clear. Premium SUVs are almost always the flagship models for manufacturers. They are the testing ground for the newest, most complex technologies.
Right, they get the massive pillar-to-pillar screens, the augmented reality heads-up displays, the rear seat entertainment tablets for the kids, the complex multi-zone climate controls.
And to support all of that, premium SUVs often utilize a much more complex internal network topology. Instead of a flat CAN bus architecture found in a basic sedan, a luxury SUV might use a zone-based architecture relying on automotive Ethernet just to handle the massive bandwidth required by all those cameras and LiDAR sensors. This means more microprocessors, complex routing tables, and inherently more code. More features directly correlate to more bugs, particularly in that highly exposed infotainment module.
So the cloud APIs are completely porous, the dashboard screens are practically Swiss cheese, and the premium vehicles are the most vulnerable of all. But if we pull back and look at the macro picture, it actually gets even worse. Because attackers have realized they don't even need to hack the car directly. They don't even need to hack the OEM's cloud. They can just hack the people who build the components.
We are talking about the supply chain now, and the automotive supply chain is arguably the most complex, deeply nested manufacturing ecosystem on the planet.
An automaker, the OEM whose badge is on the steering wheel, doesn't build the car from scratch. They're essentially systems integrators. They rely on Tier 1 suppliers for massive pre-assembled systems like the entire braking array or the complete infotainment head unit. But it doesn't stop there. Those Tier 1 suppliers rely on a massive web of Tier 2 and Tier 3 suppliers for the microchips, the printed circuit boards, and crucially, the open-source software libraries that get compiled into the final code.
It is a massive web of transitive trust. And the data from the AutoISAC Automotive Information Sharing and Analysis Center shows that ransomware operators have thoroughly mapped this web and are actively exploiting its weakest links. The ISAC data explicitly tracks the ransomware creep into the sector, noting that highly organized, financially motivated threat groups like LeakNet, Lynx, Quillen, Everest, and Beast are systematically targeting the lower tiers of the supply chain.
The blast radius of these attacks is incredible. The report details recent campaigns that successfully breached 2 different OEMs, but more importantly, compromised 11 different suppliers, 3 service providers, and 3 dealerships. The strategy is obvious. Why spend months trying to breach a highly defended, well-funded OEM network when you can compromise a small, Tier 2 software vendor that provides a single, trusted diagnostic tool used by that OEM?
It is the digital equivalent of poisoning the well. If an attacker like the Quillen Group breaches a Tier 2 supplier, they don't necessarily deploy ransomware immediately. They can move laterally through the supplier's network, locate the Jenkins, build servers where the software is compiled, and inject a malicious backdoor into a firmware update before it is even cryptographically signed.
And then the supplier unwittingly sends that poisoned update up the chain to the Tier 1, who integrates it, sends it to the OEM, who then pushes it over the air to 1 million vehicles. And the vehicle accepts it without question because it carries the legitimate digital signature of the trusted supplier.
Precisely. And while espionage or backdoor access is one threat, the AutoISAC data emphasizes that disruption is equally devastating.
Which brings up the most bizarre yet perfectly illustrative incident from our entire research stack, the breathalyzer attack.
The ignition interlock incident. It perfectly encapsulates the fragility of interconnected dependencies.
According to the ISAC report, there was a targeted cyber attack on the back-end servers of a third-party breathalyzer company. These are the court-mandated interlock devices that wire directly into a vehicle's ignition relay. You have to blow into them to prove you haven't been drinking before the car will start.
Right, they operate on a fail-secure physical mechanism. If the device cannot validate the breath sample, it physically interrupts the circuit to the starter motor.
But these modern devices aren't standalone anymore. They phone home. They are tethered to the breathalyzer company's cloud infrastructure for logging and compliance reporting to the courts. So when a ransomware attack took down the back-end servers of this third-party company, the interlock devices in the vehicles lost their connection. And because they couldn't phone home, they defaulted to a fail-secure state. The attack caused actual physical vehicle immobilizations out in the real world. Innocent people, completely unrelated to the cyber attack, couldn't start their cars because a totally separate sauce company got hacked. It begs the question, how can an automaker possibly secure a vehicle when a third-party accessory can just sever the ignition wire?
They cannot control the third party's IT infrastructure, obviously, but they must manage the risk of that integration. And the industry recognizes this existential threat. Their response to this distributed supply chain chaos is a framework pushed heavily by the German Association of the Automotive Industry, or the MEDA. It's called the Cybersecurity Interface Agreement, the CSIA.
It sounds like a diplomatic treaty. What is the actual enforcement mechanism behind a CSIA? Because just asking suppliers nicely to be secure clearly isn't working.
It operates through strict contractual enforcement, specifically utilizing what's called a RASI matrix.
RASI, responsible, accountable, supported, and informed.
Correct. And this is a crucial adaptation from the standard OCI matrix used in standard IT project management. In traditional IT, the C stands for consulted, but in the physical, heavily regulated automotive supply chain, supported, or supplier, accurately defines the legal and operational burden. The ORC matrix within the CSIA contractually maps out exactly who's responsible for what across the 10 different chapters of the ISO 21434 standard.
So instead of a vague agreement to just build secure components, the OEM and the Tier 1 supplier sit down and dissect the architecture. If we take our breaking ECU example from earlier, the RC matrix legally defines that the supplier is responsible for writing the cryptographic codes for the ECU, but the OEM is accountable for performing the penetration testing on the integrated system.
Exactly. It eliminates the ambiguity that attackers exploit. It ensures that cybersecurity risk is actively managed across distributed development projects, not just during the initial build, but throughout the entire service life of the component. It answers the critical question: when a new zero-day vulnerability is discovered in an open-source library 3 years from now, whose legal responsibility is it to write, test, and deploy the patch?
And this framework isn't just best practice anymore. It is rapidly becoming a legal requirement, which brings us to the regulatory hammer that is finally swinging down on this industry. For decades, automotive cybersecurity was essentially self-governed. You tried your best, and if you failed, you dealt with a PR nightmare. But as of July 2024, that era is over.
It was a monumental shift in international law. In July 2024, the UNES Regulation 155 type approval became mandatory across 64 contracting parties.
64 countries, the entire European Union, Japan, South Korea, Australia. If you want to sell a car in any of those markets, you must comply. But what does mandatory type approval actually mean in a mechanical sense?
Type approval is the process by which a regulatory authority certifies that a vehicle model meets all statutory safety and environmental requirements. Before R155, type approval focused on emissions, crash safety, and lighting. Now, it includes a comprehensive cybersecurity audit. If an OEM cannot prove their cybersecurity posture meets the R155 standard, the authority will literally withhold the type approval certificate. Without that piece of paper, it is illegal to register or sell that vehicle in those 64 countries. The grace period for legacy architectures has officially expired. It is a hard stop.
That is immense leverage. We mentioned both R155 and R156 earlier. How do they divide the regulatory burden?
They act as twin pillars addressing different phases of the vehicle lifecycle. Regulation 155 mandates the implementation of a cybersecurity management system, or CSMS. This focuses on organizational governance, risk assessment, and incident response throughout the development and production phases. Regulation 156 mandates a software update management system, or SUMs.
Right, because fixing the vulnerabilities is just as risky as the vulnerabilities themselves.
Precisely. R156 ensures that the process of pushing an over-the-air update is cryptographically secure, that it won't inadvertently brick the vehicle's safety systems mid-drive, and that the OEM maintains a rigorous audit trail of every software version running on every single component of every car in the fleet.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. We both know how corporate compliance often works in practice. You hire an army of consultants, you generate thousands of pages of policy documents, you build a beautiful ROSI matrix, you pass the audit, get the certificate, and then everyone goes right back to building vulnerable systems. Is passing this R155 audit actually going to stop a dedicated ransomware group?
The regulators anticipated the paper compliance loophole, and the brilliance of the R155 framework lies in how it links organizational process to hard technical evidence. Process compliance is achieved by following the ISO 21434 standard. That gets your CSMS certified. But R155 includes a specific mechanism called Annex 5.
Annex 5. It sounds like a classified military document.
It is essentially a rigid, non-negotiable threat catalog. Annex 5 lists 69 specific threat scenarios that an OEM must address. An OEM cannot just present a policy document and say, we have a strong security culture. They must rigorously map every single threat in Annex 5 to a traceable, deployed technical mitigation.
So if Annex 5 says threat, spoofing of messages on internal vehicle networks, The OEM has to point to the exact lines of code or the specific hardware module that prevents spoofing. And if they claim a threat is not applicable to their vehicle, the independent technical services auditors will demand mathematical proof as to why. They can't just paper over the cracks.
Exactly. And the most common technical mitigation auditors look for to satisfy that specific internal spoofing threat is COC, Secure Onboard Communication.
Right, let's dig into COC because this is the lock on the bedroom doors inside our party line analogy. How does COC actually secure the CAN bus despite the massive computational constraints of the ECUs?
It is a fascinating piece of cryptographic engineering designed specifically for real-time systems. SecOC doesn't encrypt the data payload itself. Encrypting and decrypting data takes too long and would delay critical braking signals. Instead, it focuses on authentication and integrity. It appends a message authentication code, a MASI, to the data packet.
So it's essentially a digital signature attached to the plaintext message. The braking ECU sees the command apply brakes, checks the AMC, and if the AMC matches the shared cryptographic key, it knows the command genuinely came from the collision avoidance system.
Correct. But a MAXI alone isn't enough because of replay attacks. If an attacker records the legitimate unlock doors message with its valid MS, they could just play that exact same message back onto the CAN bus an hour later and the doors would open.
Right, because the cryptographic signature is technically valid. The lock thinks it's a real key. So how does SecOC stop a replay attack?
By utilizing freshness values, typically implemented as monotonic counters.
Monotonic meaning a counter that only ever goes up, it never resets or goes backward.
Exactly. Every time the sending ECU transmits a message, it increments the counter. It includes this counter value in the calculation of the MC. When the receiving ECU gets the message, it checks the counter. If the received counter value is lower than or equal to the last message it received, it immediately rejects it as a replay attack. It guarantees the message is not only cryptographically authentic, but that it was generated right this millisecond.
It adds an expiration date to the data. That is brilliant engineering. But even if we lock down the internal network with SecOC and we secure the cloud APIs and we vet the supply chain, we still have the aftermarket to deal with. I can go online right now, buy a cheap OBD2 diagnostic dongle for 20 bucks, plug it directly into the physical port under my steering wheel, and link it to a sketchy app on my phone. Does R155 cover that?
R155 strictly covers the type approval of the motor vehicle itself. It does not cover aftermarket accessories. However, the European Union recognized this massive loophole and is closing it with the Cyber Resilience Act, the CRA.
So the net is widening.
The CRA introduces horizontal cybersecurity requirements for all products with digital elements sold in the EU. This means if a third-party vendor sells an aftermarket telematics dongle, a smart charging cable, or a standalone fleet management software package, it must legally meet strict cybersecurity baseline standards, provide security updates for a defined period, and report exploited vulnerabilities to authorities.
So we're attempting to regulate every single node in the ecosystem. The car, the updates, the supply chain, the aftermarket dongles. But I still have to challenge the fundamental premise of all this regulation. The ink on R155 is barely dry, and yet, as we saw in the Anonymous Cup, hackers are already exploiting 13 entirely new vulnerability types that aren't specifically categorized in the Annex 5 threat catalog. Can a static regulation, a piece of paper written in a committee room, ever truly outpace a dynamic adversary who is inventing new zero-day exploits this morning?
You've hit on the central existential tension in cybersecurity. The honest answer is no. A static regulation can never outpace a dynamic adversary. Compliance is a trailing indicator of security.
So what is the solution? If factory gate security is dead and compliance isn't enough, how do we actually protect these networks?
The philosophy of the industry has to undergo a fundamental evolution, which is perfectly articulated in the conclusions of the Upstream Security Report. The industry must move away from a set-it-and-forget-it compliance mindset. Passing the R155 audit is the floor, it is not the ceiling. The future of automotive security requires building agentic, resilient transportation networks.
Let's define agentic in this context. It sounds like you were describing the security system as a living entity.
In a way, yes. An agentic system isn't a passive wall waiting to be hit. It has agency. It is actively monitoring, actively hunting for anomalies, and capable of autonomous defensive actions. It requires total, fleet-wide situational awareness.
So it's essentially an AI-driven security operations center, SSE, specifically for vehicles.
Precisely. You have to centralize the telemetry data from the vehicle's internal ECUs, the supply chain APIs, the cloud backend, and the charging infrastructure, and continuously analyze it in real time. If an attacker discovers a new zero-day exploit and attempts to use it on a single fleet vehicle in Nairobi, the agentic security system needs the situational awareness to instantly identify the anomalous behavior, generate a defensive signature, and push that updated security posture to a vehicle in Switzerland before the attacker can even attempt to scale the exploit.
It's not about building an unbreakable car anymore. The fortress mentality is gone. It's about building a car that can take a punch, recognize exactly how it was hit, and dynamically adapt its defenses before the second punch lands.
Resilience over absolute prevention. Because in a hyper-connected world where a vulnerability in a third-party breathalyzer API can paralyze a fleet, the illusion of absolute prevention is the greatest vulnerability of all.
Eso es todo para este episodio de Cybersecurity Under Pressure. Real attacks, real lessons. It is genuinely terrifying to realize that the 2-ton machine we strap our families into is just another node on a massive shifting digital network fighting off the exact same invisible wars as our bank accounts. See you in the next chapter.
You have been listening to Cybersecurity Under Pressure. Real attacks, real lessons. Real incidents leave real lessons. Stay prepared, stay critical, and keep following the evidence.